In 2009, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 grossed $1 billion in record time. But instead of a bonus, the creators were met by armed guards and a corporate lockout. This is their story. On a cold morning in March, the two men who built the world's biggest gaming franchise were marched out of their own building like criminals. They weren't just being fired, they were being robbed. To understand this betrayal, we have to go back to 2001. Jason West and Vince Zampella co-founded a tiny studio called Infinity Ward. When the giant Activision bought them out 2 years later, it seemed like a perfect partnership. Jason and Vince kept total creative control, leading the charge into a new era of gaming. By November 2009, they released Modern Warfare 2. It wasn't just a successful game, it was a cultural explosion that grossed over $1 billion, making everyone involved incredibly rich. But inside the sleek corporate boardrooms of Activision, the mood was anything but celebratory. It was greedy. The contract Jason and Vince had signed guaranteed them massive royalty payments if they delivered a hit. And we are talking about tens of millions of dollars. Instead of writing those checks, Activision's top executives decided they simply didn't want to pay. In late 2009, they launched a covert internal operation with a name straight out of a spy novel: Project Icebreaker. The goal was simple and incredibly sinister. They wanted to dig up any dirt, find any minor infraction, or even manufacture an excuse to fire the duo for cause. If they could terminate the contracts for a breach, those massive royalty checks would legally vanish. The executives began treating their top creators like enemy spies, launching secret investigations and frantically scouring through years of private emails to find a smoking gun. They were so blinded by the money they hoped to save that they didn't realize their own internal emails, which outlined this ruthless strategy, were creating a permanent and damning paper trail that would eventually come back to haunt them. The corporate guillotine finally dropped on March 1, 2010. Jason and Vince were called into a meeting with human resources and the top brass. Without any warning, they were fired for alleged insubordination. Before they could even process the shock, plainclothes security guards stepped into the room and frog-marched them out of the Encino studio they had built from the ground up. They were locked out of their computers, barred from speaking to their team, and stripped of the millions they had rightfully earned. It was a brutal and humiliating public execution designed to send the clear message: nobody is bigger than the company. Activision thought they had successfully stolen the golden goose and discarded the farmers without paying a single dime. But they severely underestimated the loyalty of their staff and the fury of two men who had absolutely nothing left to lose. If you love seeing greedy corporations get exactly what is coming to them, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because the revenge these two were about to take is the stuff of absolute legend. I promise you, the payout for this betrayal was going to be more expensive than Activision ever imagined. The immediate aftermath of the firing was pure chaos. Inside Infinity Ward, the development team was shell-shocked. Their leaders, the creative visionaries who had just delivered a billion-dollar launch, were simply gone. Rumors swirled through the hallways as Activision executives scrambled to keep the remaining developers in line. They promised the staff that their bonuses were safe as long as they kept their heads down and kept working. Meanwhile, Jason and Vince were sitting at home, watching their reputations get dragged through the mud by corporate PR spin. Activision painted them as rogue employees who were trying to sabotage the entire company from within. The legal system seemed like a daunting and impossibly expensive mountain to climb, especially against a multi-billion-dollar corporation with an army of ruthless lawyers. But Jason and Vince weren't going to roll over and play dead. Just 2 days after being escorted from the building, on March 3, 2010, they struck back. They filed a massive $36 million lawsuit against Activision for unpaid royalties and wrongful termination. The battle lines were officially drawn. While Activision's lawyers prepared to bury them in endless litigation, the two developers realized they needed a powerful ally to survive this war. They needed someone with deep pockets, and more importantly, someone who absolutely despised Activision. They were looking for a way to turn the tables, and they were about to find the perfect partner. I watched as the turning point finally arrived. It wasn't just about the money anymore. Jason and Vince realized that a settlement wouldn't be enough to wash away the taste of betrayal. They wanted to hit Activision where the board members would feel it most, right in the marketplace. If the giant wanted to steal their hard work, they would simply build something better and burn the old empire down. In April 2010, they made a move that felt like a grenade going off in the industry. They didn't just find a new job, they partnered with Electronic Arts, Activision's most bitter and hated rival. With EA's bottomless bank account behind them, they announced a new studio. They called it Respawn Entertainment. I love that name. It's a gaming term for coming back to life after you've been killed, a literal middle finger to the men who thought they had buried them. They weren't just two guys looking for a paycheck anymore. They were resurrected competitors armed with billions, ready to dismantle everything they had once built for the enemy. The announcement was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. It proved they weren't defeated, and more importantly, it signaled to their old team at Infinity Ward that there was a life raft waiting for them right across the street. The war was no longer contained in a courtroom. It was an all-out battle for the very soul of the industry. But I knew Activision wouldn't just sit back and let them build a rival empire without a fight. They are a corporate machine, and machines don't have hearts. They have legal departments. They immediately escalated the war, filing a massive countersuit that dragged Jason, Vince, and even EA into a toxic legal crossfire. The claims were aggressive and intended to ruin them. They accused the duo of corporate espionage, claiming they had been secretly plotting with EA while still on the Activision payroll. They were asking for hundreds of millions of dollars in damages, a sum designed to ensure Jason and Vince would never work in this industry again. The weight of it was suffocating. Suddenly, every private email and every late-night phone call was being picked apart by Activision's high-priced legal attack dogs. For a moment, it really felt like Respawn might be killed before it even had a chance to breathe. If Activision could prove that West and Zampella had colluded with the enemy before they were fired, the whole story would change. They wouldn't be the victims of corporate greed, they'd be the traitors. The risk of total bankruptcy was looming over them, and the pressure was enough to break anyone. But in a fight like this, you have to be willing to lose everything to win. This was the first real time that Activision was scared, and I knew the discovery process was about to get very, very ugly. What the suits at Activision didn't realize was that their aggressive legal posturing was about to blow up in their faces. By forcing this lawsuit into the discovery phase, they were legally required to open up their own filing cabinets and digital archives. And that's when the truth about Project Icebreaker finally leaked into the light. It's funny how arrogance makes people careless. The very paper trail the executives had left behind while plotting to fire the creators was suddenly entered into the court record as hard evidence. Internal emails proved, beyond any doubt, that Activision had actively conspired to manufacture fake reasons to fire them just to avoid paying out those Modern Warfare 2 royalties. They had literally documented their own corruption. The trap they set for Jason and Vince had snapped shut on their own ankles. Activision had unwittingly handed their former employees the exact weapon needed to dismantle the countersuit. While the lawyers were sweating in their expensive suits, the news was filtering back to the team still working at Infinity Ward. They were disgusted by what they were reading, and they were finally ready to make their move. The trickle of resignation started quietly, but it quickly turned into a flood that no one could stop. Throughout April 2010, the very heart of Infinity Ward began to stop beating. We aren't just talking about a few junior designers. We are talking about the elite engineers, the visionary artists, and the lead developers who made Call of Duty what it was. Roughly 40 of the most talented people in the industry handed in their notices, packed their boxes, and walked out the door in a single wave. The studio that had just delivered a billion-dollar masterpiece became a ghost town practically overnight. And I think we all know where they were headed. They went straight to Respawn Entertainment to rejoin the leaders they actually trusted. Activision's executives watched in absolute horror as their most valuable asset was hollowed out from the inside. They had fired 2 men to save a few $1 million, and in their greed, they accidentally handed their biggest rival a ready-made team of the best developers on the planet. It makes you wonder if the money was ever really worth the moral cost of what they did. The walls were closing in, their dirty laundry was public record, and the nightmare was only just beginning. Just when Activision thought things couldn't get any worse, the situation shifted from a disaster to a total catastrophe. The employees who had walked out didn't just want new jobs, they wanted justice. They had watched how Jason and Vince were treated, and they realized that if a corporation is willing to steal from the people at the top, they'll definitely steal from everyone else. In a stunning twist, 38 of those former Infinity Ward developers banded together to file their own separate lawsuit. They were demanding $125 million in unpaid bonuses that Activision had tried to withhold. Suddenly, the giant was fighting a two-front war. On one side, they had the two founders they had betrayed, and on the other, they had the very soldiers who had built their empire. It was a beautiful, unified front. Activision tried every trick in the book to delay the trial, burying everyone in mountains of paperwork, hoping to starve the developers out until they gave up. But they didn't realize these people were used to crunch time and impossible odds. They stood their ground and refused to settle for pennies. As the trial date got closer, the pressure on the executives reached a boiling point. The thought of Bobby Kotick and his inner circle having to explain Project Icebreaker to a jury was a reality they were desperate to avoid. In May 2012, just days before the employee lawsuit was set to go before a jury, the multi-billion-dollar giant finally blinked. Activision was terrified of the public humiliation that would come from their internal secrets being shouted in open court, and they completely caved. In a massive mid-trial payout, they handed over $42 million to the developers. That included every cent of their withheld bonuses, plus a 10% interest penalty. It was a total, undeniable victory for the people who refused to be bullied. But the reckoning wasn't over yet. Only a month later, Activision realized they had no path to victory in the primary suit against Jason and Vince. They quietly settled out of court for a sum that remains a secret to this day, though industry insiders know it was tens of millions of dollars. The poetic justice of it all is just perfect. The executives who plotted to steal the royalties ended up paying out a fortune anyway, all while losing the talent that made them successful in the first place. I've always believed that you get what you give, and Activision gave nothing but betrayal. If you enjoy seeing the underdog finally get their due, make sure you hit that subscribe button and stay with me, because this story proves that sometimes the good guys actually win. Jason and Vince didn't just survive, they were vindicated. The fallout from the lawsuits left Activision with a reputation that was nothing short of toxic. I watched as their flagship studio, once the crown jewel of the entire industry, became a fractured shell of its former self. Infinity Ward was forced into a painful, desperate rebuilding process, trying to replace the legendary talent that had walked out the door with people who simply didn't have the same creative soul. The gaming community didn't forget either. They saw the publisher for exactly what it was: a ruthless corporate machine that viewed its creative geniuses as disposable assets. Those internal emails about Project Icebreaker? They didn't just go away. They became a permanent stain on the legacies of those executives, a cautionary tale that I still hear whispered in development circles today. It is a lesson in the dangers of unchecked greed. They tried to play hardball to save a few dollars on royalty checks, and it ended up costing them a literal fortune. Between the legal fees, the massive settlement payouts, and the total loss of their most elite team, the math just didn't add up. The very people they tried to crush walked away richer, vindicated, and perfectly positioned to build something even bigger. It was the kind of backfire that you only see once in a generation, and it felt like justice. With the legal nightmare finally buried, I watched as Jason and Vince got back to what they were actually born to do. They didn't just fade away. They built Respawn Entertainment from the ground up, and it flourished under their leadership. They went on to create Titanfall, a series that felt like a shot of adrenaline to the first-person shooter genre. But they were just getting started. Later, they launched Apex Legends, which became an absolute juggernaut and generated billions of dollars in revenue. It was the ultimate proof that their success at Infinity Ward had not been some lucky fluke or a product of the Activision machine. It was their vision, their talent, and their drive. They did not just survive a corporate assassination attempt, they thrived. They built a new empire on their own terms, far away from the toxic environment that had nearly destroyed everything they worked for. It is a rare thing in this industry to see creators win that big, and it felt like a victory for everyone who has ever been told they are replaceable. To me, the saga of Infinity Ward and Activision is the ultimate story of corporate karma. It is proof that no matter how much power a company thinks it has, it cannot simply steal from the creative minds that build its empire without facing the consequences. Jason and Vince stood up to a monolithic giant, called their bluff, and walked away with their money, their team, and their dignity intact. It is a revelation that changed how I look at the entire industry. If you want to hear more of these stories where the underdog actually gets their revenge, you should definitely subscribe and stay tuned. I have plenty more to share with you, and I would not want you to miss what is coming next. Thanks for sticking with me. It is a reminder that sometimes, if you are brave enough to fight back, you actually get the ending you deserve.